Welcome to Inflection. I am your host, Brian Berletic. Joining me, as always, is Angelo Giuliano. Hello, Angelo. How are you?
Hi, Brian. Great. Hello, everyone. Nice to be live.
Okay, and for everyone in the comment section, first of all, thank you for joining us. Let us know how our audio is. If there's any issues, feel free to shout out in the comment section. We're going to have a question and answer session toward the end, so just kind of think of what questions you want to ask, and then put like a capital Q or question in all caps, and then your question, and we'll try to answer all of them. And today we're going to be talking about not just the rise of China. Everyone's talking about the rise of China, but with the rise of China, and because I live in Southeast Asia, I see the entire region, all of Asia, rising with China. And this is very important to keep in mind and to understand, why the US is trying to encircle and contain China, and what it's actually trying to do with Southeast Asia. It's not trying to get them on America's side to boost them up in a different way. It's to keep everyone down, not just China, but all of Asia down. So we're going to be talking about that. Angela, before we get into the actual articles and information, would you like to give us some thoughts about how you see? Because you were in Hong Kong, you've lived in China, Taiwan, you've traveled all around Asia. What are your thoughts on this?
I agree with you. I think it's about containing not only China. People need to have a bigger picture. It's about containing Southeast Asia and the global South. You see, there are two blocks confronting. We have on one side is the Washington consensus, which is the US, the big corporation, the elites, and you have the IMF and the World Bank. On the other side, you have the Beijing consensus, where the Beijing is actually recycling its US dollar trade surplus into the global South. Why do you think this is a Belt and Road Initiative? It's a way to recycle this US trade surplus, but also to raise the level of the global South. And actually, it's a process of decolonization and also abandoning the dollar, because the last fight is the dollar. Once the dollar loses its hegemonic position, then we are going to enter into a new global order, which is going to be multipolar. No more hegemonic, more multipolar, where you have like big blocks having voices, and actually, an opportunity for the global South. So it's about the global South. People need to look at the big picture, and I think it's absurd if you have some people that are in Africa and South America that have been oppressed by hundreds of years of humiliation, of colonization. They should back China, because China, it's not perfect, but it's the alternative. It's the possibility to get out of colonization and free up this global South.
Yes, and you'll see a lot of people in the West trying to argue that China is also a colonialist nation, an expansionist, a neo-empire, which is completely absurd. And we're going to show a couple of case studies. We're not going to go over all of ASEAN's members, but there's a couple ones that we're really familiar with that I think really make the point. But what you see China doing is building up its partners. It's not imposing itself on them as the West always does. It's building them up. It's giving them infrastructure that will make that country stronger and enhance the balance of power globally. This works in favor of everyone, including China, because as you can see, empire is a dead end. The West is in terminal decline. It's irreversible because they have created an unsustainable system. And if China wants its prosperity to be sustainable, they need to avoid that trap, which is a nation is pushed into it by human nature. And you need to engineer a system that acknowledges human nature, the flaws that push a nation toward empire. You need to engineer a system that puts blocks between empire and people who would aspire toward it. So I want to take a look at this Global Times. Now, Global Times, yes, it's Chinese state media, but I was reading through this and it made so many very clear points that I was just very happy to see someone anywhere making these points. So China-ASEAN expected to upgrade ties to comprehensive strategic partnership at special summit as U.S. provocation fails in region. We've actually been talking about this almost every single episode, you and I, Angelo. And I want to do a search on the page for contain. So here, stable China-ASEAN relations have somewhat prevented the further deterioration of relations between the world's two greatest economies. As the bloc, indispensable for the US's China containment approach, firmly clung to its position of not picking sides despite facing growing pressure from the US. And we see this every day, the US piling pressure on ASEAN to cut ties with China. Why would ASEAN do that? And we're going to look at the relationship of ASEAN nations with China and why that makes no sense at all. Let's see. Yes, right here. Indispensable for the containment approach. And then right here, we're talking about AUKUS. It's a US-led united front and an additional component of its Indo-Pacific strategy to contain China. But no ASEAN country is likely to join the US-led Asian NATO in view of close trade ties with China. And what is the US protecting Asia from, Angelo? At least what do they say? What do they say they're protecting Asia from?
Well, they're talking about the freedom of navigation, but those problems of border disputes when it comes to freedom of navigation, you have plenty around the world. You have problems between Turkey and Greece. You have problems of fishing, between French and English. You even have problems that are still pending between Canada and the US. If you dig into this, this is normal stuff, And what happened around the world is there's no dispute. I mean, it's a status quo. It's something that is pending. And once in a while you have clashes, but actually the clashes you have sometimes between the British and the French are actually more violent than what you have in South China Sea. And again, there's even a clash. We don't mention this, but even actually Australia has clashes with Indonesia. But do we talk about this freedom of navigation, the problems they have between both? No, it's a standing, it's a problem that is there, and you set it aside. It's not you're not going to go to war for this. But again, and then freedom of navigation, it is more important for China in South China Sea than for the US. I mean, China lives. It depends on that. And especially on the Malacca Strait, there's 80% of South China Sea trade which is going through that there. And this is the most sensitive area in the whole region.
And the map we're looking at comes from CSIS. It's one of these Western arms manufacturer funded think tanks. It's extremely anti-China. And this is their own interactive map. And you can clearly see that all of the trade going through the South China Sea is going to and from China or in between partners of China's who are very important to China. There is no reason why China would ever disrupt this trade for any reason at all. It makes absolutely no sense. The only people that would benefit from disrupting this trade would be the United States in its efforts to contain not just China, but all of Asia. And that's what it's actually there in the South China Sea for. This is what it's trying to convince Southeast Asian countries of, that it's there to protect them, but actually it's there to just make a problem for everyone, including Southeast Asia. So let's go here. Let's look at, I think we're going to go with Laos first. So this is opening of 1,000-kilometer Laos-China Railway approaches. So we talked about, it was kind of like a soft opening, hasn't started running. They're still testing the line. Next month, this will go into service, and it will be moving freight along this high-speed rail line through Laos. And then it'll connect to Thailand eventually. So this is what China's doing with Laos. Here's another article from The Star. Laos-China Railway inauguration set for December 3rd, but passenger transport date not yet decided. So this is actually the article where they go into moving freight. And Laos is landlocked, has no access to the ocean. Its terrain is extremely difficult. So a high-speed rail line allowing you to travel through the entire country. This is a huge leap forward for Laos. What has the US done in the last 50 years in all of Southeast Asia that compares to just this alone? Angelo, you got any thoughts on this? And one last thing for Laos, let's just look at who they export to. This is their main export. This is their export economy. These are the countries it depends on. Thailand or China or Vietnam alone is more than all of these other regions combined. Angelo, what are your thoughts on Laos and how it fits into this, what we're talking about today?
Well, Laos is a good example. You know, Laos is desperate to have access to the sea because it's landlocked. No access to the sea means no access to large trading. I just want to point out something. You know, there are lots of analysts that actually are changing their narratives every day. You know, according to some statements from Biden or Xi Jinping and so on, and they're trying to read the lines of on a weekly basis. I think what is important is the long-term plans. I'm going to give you some examples. You know, AUKUS. You know, the fact that they are investing to submarines. We are talking about 30 years plan, and this is going to give like long-term direction of the politics of the Australia. You know, it's not going to change. This is why China dropped Australia. They knew, that Australia was going all the way. You have other plans which are related to infrastructure. When you have a partnership in infrastructure, with Laos, this is a 10, 20 years plan. So you're already shaping the relationship with Laos. Now you have Thailand. You are very, very familiar with Thailand. Thailand is buying submarines from China. That's a very clear statement. So now we are at the stage where, the US is trying to build up a coalition. It's very similar to World War II, where they wanted to have like two blocks. And, it's going to be you're with us or against us. Remember, after World War II, there was a movement in the 50s called the non-aligned movement, which was 120 countries. They didn't want to take side either for the USSR, the Warsaw Pact or NATO. They wanted to be out of that, and that was a sign. And now it hasn't changed. So what the US is trying to do is trying to build up a coalition, and it is not working because there is no puppet government, in Asia that will take side. The only countries so far that they took side are the old colonial countries. Australia, UK, US. And even Europe, they didn't even knock at the door of Europe. Why? Because they knew Europe, they might see Russia as a threat, somehow as a threat, but not China. China is so far, so it is not working. So it's really important. Look at the long-term strategy. When the US is investing 300 million in propaganda against China, that's a long-term plan. So we need to read the long-term plan. When you have massive investment to NED into regime change, look at that. Not the speeches, because it doesn't change us overnight. It's not 1 week like this. Oh, this is a good sign from Biden. Oh, there's a meeting. Oh, this is positive. No. Look at the long-term plans. And when it comes to Belt and Road Initiative, that's a long-term plan. It's a commitment to say, well, why would you go sign MOU on the Belt and Road Initiative and on the other side preparing for war? Doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely. And so you see, actually, if you look at all of these countries in Southeast Asia, they do so much trade with China. And this next example is a perfect example, because if you had to pick one country in Southeast Asia that hated China the most people would say Vietnam, right? Vietnam had this complicated history with China, and yet what I'm about to show you is the actual state of relations between China and Vietnam. So again, this is from the Global Times, because I literally could not find a Western source covering this story because they don't want to talk about this. China's first high-speed railway connecting port bordering Vietnam cuts through all tunnels. So this was a big achievement in finishing this line. And what this is going to do is give Vietnam direct access to China's high-speed rail network. Okay, so there's one. And by the way, anyone who wants to read through all of these articles, they're in the video description. So just go in there and you could read these whole articles. And I encourage people to do it. There's a lot of good information there. Even if it's from a Western source, if you could read through between the lines, there's a lot of good information there. So this is from the South China Morning Post. Vietnam's Chinese-built metro line opens as Hanoi seeks to cut traffic pollution. So say if you've been to Bangkok, you see how bad the traffic is. When I hear about Hanoi, I just think it's as bad or probably worse. And the pollution is a serious health hazard. You don't need to do any study. Just walk out on the sidewalk for 10 minutes. And so this is a big improvement for Hanoi. Mass transit does help move people through the city without using cars. It cuts down on pollution. It makes everything more efficient. And it supercharges development everywhere along the line, everywhere the line passes. And so here are scenes from it. It's open. People are riding it. That's it right there. Let's turn the volume down and maybe watch the video. So China built this for Vietnam, this country that we're told hates China. This is what China is doing for Vietnam. So Angela, before we move on to the next story regarding Vietnam, what do you think about the rhetoric between Vietnam and China and the reality?
Well, we need to look at money. I mean, money is power, and those we need to look at facts, not like polls, saying, oh, would you go to war with China and so on. We need at money, which is power. When you have an integration of those economies, Asian countries, and with China, we're talking about an average of their trade with China, which is around 30%. The extreme are, like Myanmar, we go up to 40%, and Taiwan is 50% of Taiwan's economy, which is linked to China. Those are facts. When you're doing trade, you have an integration, and you have a joint future. The future of Asian is linked to China. If China was to go to war, we are talking about the containment of all Southeast Asia and a setback of 10 or 20 years. Those countries. I give you an example. In 2008, Australia didn't suffer the financial crisis. Do you know why? Well, because China was massively buying Australian product. If it wasn't for China, Australia would have suffered. So their fate is linked to China, and they know that. Now you can have public opinion that are actually a bit anti-Chinese, when it comes to Vietnam and Philippines, But this is the weakness of China. China, in terms of soft power, is extremely weak. The theory, when it comes to China, with the way they look at power, the power of a country there are three levels. There's one which is the army, the hard power, army, money, and soft power, which is the media, which is Hollywood, and so on. The weakness of China is that it doesn't sell well, and it doesn't have its hands on all the mainstream social media and Western media, and when you see how much money is put into propaganda against China, US AGM, the propaganda arm of the US, we are talking about $1 billion per year only on propaganda, and it's extremely aggressive. It's about we need it's anti-Russia and anti-China, and that's the weakness of China. This is an amazing project. If people go there, they see like, well, it's tangible. It's not empty stuff. It's not about we're gonna give you freedom, we're gonna give you democracy and so on. No. The effect of that. Train. Yeah. I mean, I've been going to Bangkok for many years. I mean, if there was no MTR, the metro system, if there was not that, it would be, there would be no foundation for prosperity, because infrastructure is the foundation for prosperity. When you have that, you have linked to other countries. Everything grows around that. Because you create economic corridors. You have a train station, then you have housing around, you have schools around, and that's how you actually increase your urbanization trend. Urbanization means industrialization and growth and prosperity.
Yeah, and I've watched in Bangkok how the expansion of the BTS and MRT, how these lines have transformed entire neighborhoods that were like on the outskirts of the city, and then they started looking like part of the inside of the city. Like everything just improved, and it makes business a lot easier. The easier it is to move things around, to move people around, the easier it is to transmit electricity. All of these things makes it easier to do economic activity, makes more economic activity. It's common sense. And this is what China understands. This is what Asia understands. This is how they measure progress. And like you said, there's a huge push. And I see people in the comment section also saying that, they're in Vietnam and they don't see this animosity towards China. And I suspect, because I have never been to Vietnam, I don't know what it's like there, but I suspect it's very similar to Thailand, where you have a small handful of malcontents who hate China, and that's who the Western media focuses on. And they exclude everybody else in the country who either doesn't care or who actually does like China and does prefer doing business with China. Let's go to this one. So this is from CCTV. This is, again, Chinese state media. China integrates freight train services linking Vietnam, Europe. Let's see if the video gets going here. So what is this about? We've talked about this too. This is about China developing this rail line from China across Eurasia into Europe to move goods using freight trains. And they have deliberately included Vietnam in this freight line. So now Vietnam can send products by rail across China, across Eurasia, into Europe. It's another way to send goods. And we've talked about the pros and cons of sea freight and rail freight. And so if there is a product that benefits by going by rail across Eurasia to Europe, now Vietnam has access to that. So that's three things that China has done, major things to help enhance Vietnam's economy, both domestically within its borders and to help send products past its borders. Let's see. So these are all pictures along the line. Here's Radio Free Asia, U.S. State Department media. China's bullying in the South China Sea helped advance U.S.-Vietnam ties, says former envoy. And if you read through this, not really. There's no substance in here. This is just the U.S. continuously saying China is a threat to Vietnam, and Vietnam kind of going along with it, but nothing of any sort of substance. And all the U.S. can offer Vietnam is this sort of security alliance, which, whatever that means, I guess buying U.S. weapons, I guess that's what it means. How is that actually helping Vietnam with one of its largest trade partners? And just to show you how ludicrous this is, where did Vietnam export to in 2019? China, 21.45%, plus Hong Kong, 3.18%, versus the United States, its second largest export market, at 19.26%. So people see Vietnam playing this balancing game. This is why, because the U.S. is also an important export market. They don't want to get cut off from that. But they're also not going to start a war with China, their number one export market, to keep access to this. Angelo, anything you want to add regarding Vietnam?
Yeah, I think it's important just to analyze the trade with China, then the trade with Asia, and the trade then with Eurasia. Well, look at the two blocks. You have the green block and the blue block, This is the new trend. When we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, we are talking about huge block. I mean, who controls Eurasia? Because Eurasia, I don't know the combined GDP, but we are talking about probably 70% of world's economy. And if there is an integration, which actually, this is the purpose of Belt and Road Initiative, is that because you are building infrastructure within Eurasia, you are the timing for the goods is going to be shorter, like travel time and so on. And so we are talking about an integration of those economies, and this is what is dangerous for the US, but it's benefiting like local economies. I know there are some anti-imperialists. They have these narratives to say, well, as you said, China is a new imperial power, and it's a different forms of globalism. No, it's not. China respects sovereignty. When China loans, it's not going to countries and say, you have to take my loan, or I'm gonna disrupt your economy and your politics. No, it doesn't do that. It's those countries, they go to China and they say, oh, I have this project, can you help me? But not only in financing, we're talking about engineering and so on. And what is really important to understand is that there is no string attached. When the IMF and the World Bank are loaning, giving you money, it's under conditions. 50%. 50% of the loans given by the World Bank, what they tied to? They tied to privatization of water. Imagine how water is essential for national interest, and it goes against human rights. So you have countries like this, I mean, the countries that control IMF and the World Bank, the IMF is always like a European, which is at the head of the IMF, and the World Bank is an American, and mainly they control those institutions. But they have conditions. They give you a loan. The interest rate is very high. The short-term loans, and they are conditional. Conditional to what? Oh, we can send NGOs. You have to, USAID is going to pour money into your country, into civil society. We are talking about, political meddling, and then liberalization of the market.
Yes.
So here you see and you're seeing that this agenda which is behind is like big corporation. You are going to sell you state-owned assets, strategic state-owned assets, to the big corporation. Because ultimately, when we talk about countries, it's important to understand that, of course, it's the US, but behind that, who's controlling the US is the big corporation and the elites. And they want to replicate the model that you have in the US, which is for the 1%, by the 1%, but on a global scale. It's on a global scale. That's their goal.
What do they call it on Wall Street when they buy a company? They take over, like a hostile takeover. They take over the company, and then they just strip mine it, and then they dump it, and they just left. It's like a vampire draining someone of their blood, and then the company is gone. And it doesn't matter what that company was doing for society. They just do that, and then they move on. And then when you look at the IMF, this is them doing it on a global scale using these global institutions. And when the US warns ASEAN, they're like, look, beware of China, their debt trap diplomacy. And people are like, you mean like what the IMF did in the late 90s? Because we remember that, which is why the US focuses on youths who don't know anything. And I was a youth, and I admit, when I was a youth, I didn't know anything. And so that's why they go after the youth, because they're the only ones that are going to buy into this agenda, potentially. Everyone else remembers what the US already did, what their promises were, how they broke it. And they know that this time around is no different. So this is Vietnam. Next, we're going to go to Thailand. That's where I live. I've lived there almost my entire adult life. And I just want to show people what's going on in Thailand. People still to this day will argue with me and say Thailand is a puppet of the US. And I have to go through the statistics every single time with them. So this is, again, from the start. Thailand seeks connection with Laos-China Railway, say top officials. Actually, the plan all along was for Kunming to be connected to Bangkok via high-speed rail through Thailand, through Laos. That was the plan. And so that's what's going on. I think this is like a stopgap to connect Thailand's existing rail line to this new high-speed rail line in Laos. I think that's what's going on here. And I don't think it's going to take much to do it, because Thailand already built like a friendship symbolic rail line that crossed the Mekong River, went into Laos, and then just stopped like right on the other side of the border. So all they got to do is keep building the track a little further to where the high-speed rail terminates near Vientiane, the capital. It's all in the same area, very doable. So that's this article. Here's Voice of America. So again, this is U.S. State Department funded media. Thai water project clears major hurdle after China shows interest. So this is what China does. They come into a country, they see a country deliberating over a major infrastructure project. This is going to help irrigate water to farmers in central Thailand, this project, but it was just too big for Thailand to tackle on their own. China comes in and says, we'll help you do that. Could America do that? No. Could any of America's allies do that? The answer is no, because they can't even do that inside their own country. China has done this in their own country. They have demonstrated to the world their ability to take on these massive infrastructure projects, and now they're doing them beyond their borders. This is the difference between China and the US, and this is the difference between China raising Asia up and the US trying to tamp down Asia. So that's this article. And then here, welcoming Chinese EVs. So this used to be one thing the West was actually good at, like exporting cars everywhere. And now there's all of this competition coming out of China, especially with electric vehicles. And even in the US, electric vehicles, I would say the leader is Tesla. But they've faced a lot of problems there because they're disrupting the entrenched monopolies in the US. They face a lot of backlash. And they are working more closely with China than they are with the U.S. where they're originally from. Angelo, you got anything to jump in and say?
No, well, good point. The EV is a good example. It shows you how the monopolies, they control everything in the US. The thing is that in China is very different. Even though China is a market economy, but if you look at the Congress, the politicians, actually you don't have capitalists. You don't have like a head of big corporation that have their hands. If they do that, actually it would be lobbying. What you call lobbying in the US would be taken as corruption in China. So you don't have that. So when the central government takes decisions, there's no lobbying like this. Like they don't meddle. So China is taking decisions. Okay, we are going to electrical vehicle. Why is it taking so much time in the US? Well, it's all lobbying. Lobbying is controlling everything. Lobbying, all those lobbies, big corporation. There was a law, I don't know exactly when, in 2005 or so, when they actually said that from now on, you have no limit in funding, and actually the corporation could pour money as much as they wanted. So this is when really it was the end of the real democracy, and we enter into the democracy of the 1%. In China, it doesn't happen like that. They say, okay, overnight, they take a decision and they say, oh, we are going to replace 10,000 buses in Shenzhen. They are going to be electric. And that's the strength of such a system. I'm not saying that this could be applied elsewhere, but it's important just to see, well, how efficient is that, and how the West is not moving. Why? Because you have those special interests. You see, healthcare for all, the healthcare for all. If you were to ask Americans, you have 70 to 80% of Americans which want healthcare for all, like the same, which actually you go around the world, it's always, you don't die because you don't have insurance, like in the US. So
yes,
how do you call it a democracy when actually the result is that it's been forever that nothing happens? Nothing happens.
Exactly. And you will see people always saying, China can't vote for their president. President Xi is president for life. And yet if you look at a 4-year period of time in China, things have changed so rapidly for the better. Every 4 years, or every 5 to 10 years, because they do that. That's how they do their plans. Versus in the United States, my entire life being an American, I have not seen anything at all change, except maybe for the worse. Things get worse. And I remember people when I was a kid talking about healthcare, and now I'm a middle-aged adult, and they're still like, where's our healthcare? And it will never come. And they're like, if we vote these people in, maybe it'll happen. It will never happen, because democracy is a system of control. It's to make you think you have a choice. If they took your choice away, you would say, well, we can't vote. We have to do something to get what we want. And then the government would be worried, because then you'll actually do things to get what you want, instead of doing nothing and asking someone else to do it for you who is working for the corporations. It's so simple. And every 4 years, it's definitive proof that this is how it works, because nothing ever changes. You can say the same for foreign policy also. So here we go. Thailand must get its act together on U.S. Now, this is an op-ed in the Bangkok Post, and I'm divided. I don't know this person personally. I'm divided on their. I think they have to be careful, because if they say the U.S. is interfering in Thailand, they will be a pariah and they won't be allowed to publish anything anywhere. Kind of like me. So they're talking about the U.S. What does the U.S. actually offer Thailand except overpriced weapons and these security alliances against Thailand's largest trade partner? Again, it makes no sense. Same for Vietnam, same for Laos. We're going to talk about Myanmar next, but here, let's continue. Thailand delays China submarines buy amid public outrage. Now, this is 2020. There is no public outrage. There is the opposition funded by the U.S. government. So this is what the U.S. does. This is what they actually do inside your country. When your country is trying to build a positive, constructive relationship with China, they will put people in there to disrupt everything, to protest, to delay, to stop absolutely everything. So when you talk, they're like, why can't you just buy one submarine? Why do you need to buy 3? And they don't even understand how submarines work. And then they're like, if you look on the map, they're like, the Gulf of Thailand is so shallow. Why do they need submarines? You don't operate a submarine in the Gulf of Thailand. You operate it out at sea. If the enemy is already in the Gulf of Thailand, it's too late. Do they know that how far missiles can fly nowadays. So it's a debate based from absolute ignorance. It's pushed by U.S. Funded propagandists, and this is what they do inside every country to arrest development, not spur it, not offer an alternative to it. And again, Thailand, where did they export in 2019? Here and here, if you add Hong Kong and China together, it's more than the United States. So a very similar situation to Vietnam, where China is their #1 export market. The US is #2. This is why they play this balancing game. They don't want to upset the US. They like having access to that export market, even if there are all of these strings attached. Same goes for Europe. Although it's much less significant. Angelo, anything you want to throw in there about Thailand?
Well, Thailand, we mentioned before, like dismantling, like those shark, finance shark. Actually, when you look at Thaksin Shinawatra, who's the leader of the red shirt, and actually he positioned himself as a socialist, so don't be fooled, because he came from Carlyle. Carlyle, you know what it is? It's about dismantling companies, killing jobs, and so he came into power. Was the only purpose was to sell state-owned assets. And it's not the first time you have a banker, a guy from finance that does that. You have Macron in France. He came into power. The first thing he did was, okay, what can I sell to my friends from banking industry? I just want to add something which is really important. We are talking about tension in the region. Okay, if there were tensions, they should be translated into increase in spending in armament. Now I'm going to give you an average of Southeast Asia, how much they're spending in percent of GDP. We are talking about most of them are under 2%. There's only one exception, is China is slightly higher, and you have North Korea. So now even Taiwan doesn't reach 2% of its GDP. The standard for NATO countries, NATO countries, when you are into NATO, you have an obligation to reach 3%. So how can you explain there are tensions in South China Sea and they're still spending 2%? That's a fact. If they were feeling threatened by China, they would increase their military spending. Why do you think, the Philippines has problem with China? It's not increasing its spending. It's important to say, we know increasing in spending here is about in percentage of GDP. The US, we are talking about, 5%. We are close to 5%. The spending of the US, it's more than the 10 next countries after the US. I mean, we are talking about any relationship, that's 4% of the world population. So imagine that, and how much damage it does. It's not only about how it is arming and controlling the world. It's actually selling weapons everywhere. I mean, look at Yemen. Remember, Biden, before being elected, the first thing he said, I'm going to stop support of Saudi Arabia in Yemen. It's all lies. The problem is, it's very counterintuitive. Democracy, you vote, and then it's like there's no check and balance. There's no accountability. In China, it's the opposite. Because there's a tacit contract between the population and the Communist Party, the Communist Party has to deliver, and it cannot lie. And there's one thing which is really important. In China, there are tens of thousands of surveys. They're doing the surveys of what the population want. And we're talking about the village level, city, region, all the levels. So they anticipate the discontent. If people, at some point, people were starting to complain about pollution. Well, they took the decision, okay, we are going to do that. In the US, there's a problem. People start complaining. You start voting for someone, he's not going to deliver, and you elect regret. And it's very counterintuitive. We need to explain to people, it's not because you vote that it's a democracy. No, if the system is rigged, if there are not the preconditions for democracy, it's not a democracy. Ultimately, you are going to have a choice between two people that are funded by the same elites and military-industrial complex. They're not going to listen to you, who you voted, because the funding is more important. And 90% of that time, it's not on working for what they're supposed to do. 90% of that time, it's about beauty contest, and it's about how I can do funding. They're working on funding. You see, now they're already in election cycle in the US. because you have midterm election. So the Democrats won, and they voted for Biden. Now we are going to have a landslide for the other party. So you see, it's going back and forth, and because of that, those election cycles don't allow a country to have long-term plans. Infrastructure. Why don't you have a vision for the next 50 years in the U.S.? Well, you can't.
Well, they do, but it's for the corporations, not for the people, and they will never tell you. You have to read the think tank policy papers. Those are really important points to keep in mind, because like even here in Thailand, the opposition, when they do sometimes get into power, like Thaksin Shinawatra or Yingluck Shinawatra, their supporters think that that's a blank check, that once you've been voted into power, even if you're completely breaking every single law that there is, you cannot be removed from power by any means except an election. It's self-evident that democracy doesn't work. Democracy requires an informed electorate, and that is impossible on a national level. It's just simply impossible. We have one more example to go over. Myanmar. This is the Irrawaddy. This is funded by the U.S. government through the National Endowment for Democracy. So this is not Myanmar state media. And they're talking about, because we've been covering this, you and I, Angelo, have been covering this since February, since it happened. What were they doing? When the government got thrown out, the government led by Aung San Suu Kyi, everyone was saying, well, she was meeting with the Chinese president and she was signing all of these things. When you see how dependent Myanmar is on China for its economy, you will understand why. She had no choice. It wasn't because she was pro-China. It was because she had literally no choice. But now the opposition, which represents Aung San Suu Kyi, this is what they did when they got thrown out of power. They were burning down Chinese factories. So that's what this is all about. And this is the Irrawaddy complaining that these people who are burning down Chinese factories are going to get into legal trouble. Here, deadly attack on pipeline station spotlights China's high stakes in Myanmar. This pipeline is what allows China to send hydrocarbons from the Middle East directly to China without going through the Malacca Strait. So this is how China is diversifying away from the Pacific, where the U.S., its military, is waiting to disrupt Chinese trading routes. That's what this is all about. That's what the Belt and Road is all about, diversifying how resources go to and from China. And so the US-backed mobs, after being thrown out of power by the military in February, this is another thing they did. So do you notice the common denominator here, attacking China? That's what this is all about. And here, this is from Chinese media, and they're talking about this port in Rakhine State where the U.S. was stirring up trouble between the Rohingya and the ethnic majority. And they're saying this is to become a model project in China-Myanmar BRI cooperation. So actually the pipeline starts around there. It goes across the entire country into Yunnan province, China. And so this is what China is doing for Myanmar, building infrastructure. They also build roads, bridges, power plants, dams. These are all things that they're building in Myanmar. What is the U.S. building in Myanmar? Nothing. What are they offering to build? Nothing. So here, U.S. vows to work with ASEAN partners to support people of Myanmar. Who are the people of Myanmar that the U.S. is supporting? The people who want to destroy the relationship between Myanmar and China. That's who they're supporting. And that's what this whole article is about. Pressuring ASEAN to turn on one of their own members, to collapse it, which will just make it that much easier for the U.S. to pressure every other member of ASEAN. That's what's really going on here. And then here, finally, let's go to Myanmar and let's check it out. We got to put this back to country. China, 33.72%. This is Myanmar's export markets. Thailand, another really big one. Here's the United States, negligible. And yet the U.S. plays this oversized role in Myanmar's future by literally running the opposition. Angela, is there anything you want to jump in here and say? I know you got some things to say about Myanmar, especially the opposition.
Well, you mentioned the pipeline. The pipeline is critical for China. I read a think tank paper, and it was about what if tomorrow there's a blockade on China, which actually there's a high probability. It would be a scenario the same as Pearl Harbor. Remember, the US did the blockade on Japan. It was about to suffocate the Japanese economy, to contain it. It's a replica, So now Myanmar, where would China get its oil from? Actually, there are several ways, where the US could disrupt. And Myanmar is one way. There are offshore platform, of oil and gas, and then there's this pipeline that goes all the way to Yunnan province. And then there's Xinjiang. And also, so what China would do, actually, they have contingency plan, and actually the contingency plan are mainly Kazakhstan and Russia, and plus they have every country is a national reserve, security reserve. They have 100 days, so China is already, they are ready for that. They're even ready for rationing. There are plans that if tomorrow there's a blockade, we are going to do rationing, and we are going to upgrade the pipelines that they have with Kazakhstan and Russia. But you see, in the paper, it says clearly that if there was to do a blockade of China, blocks its sourcing of oil, the first thing they would do is just block the pipeline, which is actually going from offshore. You can actually, it's by the sea. Once you control the sea, then you cannot ship the oil to the pipeline that is going all the way to Yunnan. So you see, it's about this long-term plan, and people, they should read more those think tanks. And by the way, those think tanks, who are they funded by? If you look at the funding, it's military-industrial complex. So when you have all those analysts that are coming on TV, look at their funding. Who are they working for? You have this guy like Bondas, a French guy. He calls himself like a China specialist. Well, he's on all the French TV, but who does he work for? A think tank that is financed by the military-industrial complex.
Also banks, they're funded by banks and big oil, and some of them are exclusively funded by arms manufacturers, but some of them are also a combination of banks. So that just reinforces your argument even more. That's the corporations shaping Western foreign policy for their own interests at the expense of everyone's interests, including people living in the West.
Can I add just one more thing? The way I see the trend is that, I don't like the term, but the global order that the US wants to impose is going to be about destroying nation states and having actually a global world which is controlled by big corporations and elites. So actually, they do not care about the US, because those people, they can move around. They don't care. They're not. It's a globalist agenda. But then this globalist agenda is going to be controlled by elites and big corporations. And this purpose is to destroy nation states. Why do you think there was the initiative of the EU? The EU was a CIA initiative, was a US initiative. Jean Monnet, the father of the EU, was a CIA agent. It's proven, it's open. Now those papers are open. So you see, it's a project of destruction of nation states. So, and sometimes, how do you destroy nation states? I give you an example. Thailand, how do you do that? What is keeping Thailand united? Is the king. The king has been keeping, the sovereign state of Thailand for 700 years. So you attack the foundation of a country. So you attack the culture, you attack the king. It's a gradual. And, you even go all the way to family. You destroy the value of the country. Traditional countries, that are, that they have religion and so on, and they want to apply, they want them to have the same Western society, even in terms of values. How different it is in Asia. You travel around Asia, they have different values. Why would you want to impose on them your lifestyle? And again, I had some comments on Twitter. It's like, oh, what are you doing? You're going against all Western value. And I'm like,
what Western values? What are you talking about?
The imperialist agenda is a racist agenda. And very important, Western values are not universal. Let me be clear. They are not universal. It's extremely arrogant. Think about, the sense of superiority when you have those white guys. They're like, oh, we live better. But you know what? I live half of my life in China and half of my life in the West. I've traveled all around. You know what? I have nothing to teach Chinese. 25 years ago, I was maybe I was ignorant. I was at the stage where I didn't know that I didn't know. You know what is the next level? Is that you know that you don't know. I think the West should get to the second level to understand that you know that you don't know. And this is already the wisdom. Knowing that you don't know, it's already the wisdom. The problem is that the West, when it comes to Asia, they are at the stage, the worst stage. It's they don't know that they don't know. It don't apply your standards. The only way you can look at Asia objectively is using Asian eyes. By definition, if you are using Western eyes, you are not objective. And it's extremely arrogant, meaning I am right, you're wrong. But Chinese, they're not doing that. You see, because the culture, it's this old Dao vision, like black, there's no black and white. There's a mix, and there's a mutual respect. If you want to respect countries and sovereignty, well, let them find their own system, And I think you and I, we agree on one thing, is that number one, above everything, is sovereignty. Let every country decide for their fate, their political system, their value, and what they want for their country. Who am I?
Yeah.
Who am I? Am I wiser just because of the color of my skin? No. And you know what? The West being, controlling the world in terms of economy, it's just an anomaly. Look at history. We are talking about 150 years of hegemony. But, thousands of years before that, it was India and China. So, people need to look at the big picture. And anyway, Asia is much more populated. You cannot go against that. If you go against that, it means containing them and keeping them poor. But in absolute terms, well, of course, they are going to be the biggest economy. You cannot go against that. The same as Africa, it's a matter of time. Once they get out of colonization, neo-colonialism, well, you know what? They are going to prosper. And somehow, it can be win-win. I don't believe that it's going to be the collapse of the Western world. No, you know what? Why don't we help them? But not keep on using them. We use their resources and then we import the cheap labor and they become slave in our own country. Look at the Latinos in the US. They are slave labor. It's not much different. The same in Europe. They're replicating the system where you have now Syrians, like refugees coming in, and that puts pressure on the wages, local wages. In addition to that, they are willing to work at lower conditions. That's close to slave labor. And then they want to go to China and try to lecture China. How absurd is that? How absurd is that?
And I just kind of want to point out something. Some people think that, no, the EU, how could that be a CIA project? It was the US was trying to stitch all of these regions together in blocks and then stitch all of the blocks together. And then they were going to be the head of this international order, which they still talk about. They call it the international rules-based order. This is what they were stitching together. That's what ASEAN originally was supposed to be. And you could see at a certain point, like early 2000s, maybe around 2010, ASEAN was putting the brakes on this and then fully put the brakes on it. And they said, look, non-interference. We're not going to do this integration. We're going to do integration wherever it makes sense. And then other than that, we're going to preserve our national sovereignty. This is the primacy of national sovereignty. That's what we believe in. That's what we're going to stick to. And hold on a second.
When we look at questions, Brian, what do you think? Maybe we are at the 50th.
We'll do some. I got a couple of questions here. Not all of them related to the topic at hand, but Peng Shuai, this Chinese tennis player that disappeared, but didn't disappear. I mean, she was making posts. She was at a tennis event in Beijing, and then she was like talking to the IOC by video link. She didn't disappear. She was emotional. She made this very emotional social media post that was completely taken out of context. And then she withdrew from the public eye. This is not the same as disappearing. You know who's disappeared? Julian Assange, Daniel Hale. These are people who have been locked away for exposing abuse in the West. So this isn't even whataboutism. This is the West pretending something is the same as something the West is actually doing. Angelo, what are your thoughts on this case? This ridiculous.
Well, it's hilarious. So basically now that means that Chinese personalities, influencers, they should actually post videos and pictures online every day. Otherwise they would be like treated as disappeared. I mean, imagine that. I mean, not all those influencers in China, personalities, they post things online. So do I have an obligation to do that online? I mean, what? It's the same as Jack Ma. I mean, just they made a big thing. Why would China do that? I mean, really, it's just an isolated case. But you see, I mean, you see how it works. You have this fake news that comes, and it's just it takes all the news for all the time from morning till evening for 3 days. And you know what really happened, and her coming out and being at event and visible, oh, she's fine, they're not going to talk about this. And what people will keep in their mind is all the fake
she
news.
Disappeared. Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly.
Because people, they have a short attention span and they don't study. It's like, oh, it's like this. They don't have time. We are in a fast-paced society. It's like they want a shortcut. Who's the good? Who's the bad? And they're not taking the time into looking. Okay, well, what really happened? In reality, it's a non-event.
Yes. There's a question here. Why doesn't the government of Thailand and Myanmar, and we could probably add in every other country in ASEAN, why don't they do something about U.S. foreign interference? And I just want to point out again that Thailand's exports are actually pretty well distributed, but their number one export partner is China. Their number two export partner is the United States. They do not want to lose access to U.S. markets or European markets collectively. And so they know that if they just one day decided to uproot the NED, the U.S. would immediately start ramping up everything, including sanctions and other destabilization efforts that they wouldn't have normally done. So it's a constant balancing act that ASEAN is playing. They know time is on their side. They know time is on Asia's side, on China's side. They're trying to, get their cake and eat it too without provoking the U.S. And we could just look at what the U.S. is doing to Myanmar right now. In Myanmar's case, it's that they're just, the government has been fighting a war for decades against Western-backed subversion for decades, and they're just too weak to consolidate power and throw these people out. I'm sure if they had the power to do it, they would. For Thailand, it's a delicate balancing act. They do not want to cross certain lines. Someone else asked about the CIA meeting with the prime minister. I mean, they meet each other. The U.S. meets nations all around the globe. Joe Biden just met the president of China. The president of China does not work for Joe Biden. So, I mean, we have to keep all of these things in the proper context. Let's look at what a government is actually doing before we read in too much to people being pictured together in the same picture. There's usually more to it that will tell you what it actually means, if it means anything at all. The CIA visiting Thailand worries me. I think we should be worried about it. We should keep an eye out for it. But it's very clear that the U.S. backs the opposition, not the current government. So maybe they're telling the government, hey, you need to do this, or we're going to do this. Who knows? I know I wasn't at the meeting. Angelo, any thoughts on that?
Well, it's a fine line. It's a complex issue when it comes to foreign interference. It's the term when you say "damn if you do, damn if you don't." You want to do it, but if you do it, they're gonna blame you. If you don't do it, they're gonna blame you. So whatever you do, they're gonna blame you. The problem is that it's a fine line. But sometimes I think the strategy. Look at what happened in Hong Kong. There was this what we call laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is let it be. So there was so much interference. We are talking about white guys coaching the writers how to throw petrol bombs. In the street, they were caught on tape and so on. I mean, it was so obvious. And actually, they wanted to get it to the tip. It's what we call a tipping point. The tipping point of violence and also of exposure. We exposed them so much that actually we came to a point where in Hong Kong, you had 3 million people out of 7 million population that actually signed a petition for the national security law. And so that's a strategy. And it's the same in Myanmar. When they got to a point where you had the whole democracy, which was completely hijacked by the US, and they exposed all the funding. George Soros Foundation, USA, National Endowment for Democracy. And when you teach people that when you are being paid by the National Endowment for Democracy, you are nothing less than a CIA agent. So would you want to have people running your country when they're being paid by the CIA? I mean, they don't have the interest of your country at heart. So you see, the thing is that sometimes I want to believe that every country, they're smart, when it comes to, military. I mean, people, police, and people that are supposed to be the last level that are going to protect your sovereignty. I think they are smart. But sadly, you see, it gets to the point where it's extreme. I mean, you and I, we don't like to see a military government taking place of a civilian government. But that's a necessary evil. It doesn't mean that we are siding for them. But you know what? No matter what, you can talk about everything, all the problems, corruption, and so on. But number one is sovereignty.
All right, I'm going to just...
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead, Angelo.
No.
Sovereignty is number one.
It's number one. That is the precondition, number one, for democracy. If you don't have that, you are still colonized. That's it, When it comes to Myanmar, they used to have a government in exile in the 80s. So it's been always colonized. So they are still trying to be decolonized. On the other side, Thailand, they managed well, but managing well was, just playing both sides, not being aligned. Not being against China, you just try to be smart, because national interest is number one. And I do understand some countries, they don't have much choice. They not take, they somehow, like India. Look at the position of India. Well, I want to believe that India, on the surface, it's looking like it's going against China and it's pro-US, but it's not. Why do you think India is joining a Shanghai Cooperation Organization? I mean, somehow it's we are talking about a different bloc. I want to believe that if war was to happen, we would be in a hot war, that many of those countries, they would not join, but now you have a hardcore. The hardcore is what? AUKUS, that's a hardcore, and they would go all the way. Yes. But many other countries, they're not aligned. I mean, do people want to have send their kids to die for what? We are talking about Europeans dying in Asia for what? I mean, Vietnam.
Yeah. I mean, isn't it very telling that AUKUS was created supposedly, to deal with the South China Sea and Taiwan, and yet there's all of these other countries that are directly in that area, like bordering, have territory that they claim in the South China Sea or very close to Taiwan, and no one has joined AUKUS. They're not even really supporting it. They do this double speak where they're like building projects with China, and they're like, yeah, US AUKUS, that's great, that's good job. And then they're still building projects with China, and China is their number one trade partner. They're trying to buy time. They're trying to diffuse a war from taking place. They know how disastrous it'll be, and they don't want to take a hard line against the U.S. unless they absolutely, without any other choice, have to. So that's what I see. And like you said, Angelo, we have to kind of hope. We shouldn't hope. I mean, we should do as much as we can to expose these things to ordinary people. The more ordinary people understand these things, the more leverage the governments in the region have to deal with this subversion. If people aren't very aware of it and the government just unilaterally makes a decision to close all these NGOs down, people aren't even going to know what's going on. So you have to build that awareness to free the hands of these governments so that they can act in the interest of national sovereignty, just like you said, Angelo, in the best interest of the entire region, not be hostage to Washington's interests, thousands and thousands of miles away. We're at an hour. We're actually over an hour. I think we covered a lot of ground. We went over all of these countries in Asia that are being lifted up by China. I think we've done a good job comparing and contrasting the approach of the U.S. and China. Angelo, thank you, as always, for your expertise. It's indispensable. I love doing this show with you. I thank everyone who has watched live. Thank you so much. And if you're watching this afterwards, please like and share it. Think about subscribing. Check the video description for all of the links, as well as for ways you can follow my work and also Angelo's work. All of his social media links are going to be down there. Follow him on Twitter and also YouTube. And until next week, thanks again, and bye for now.
Thank you.